Thank you for joining us. We'll begin our session shortly. Thank you for joining us. We'll begin in a minute. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Industrial Unplugged, a conversation on how to prepare for a future beyond the crisis. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few things to help you get the most from today's event. When you logged in, you connected via computer audio by default. If you cannot hear or the connection is unclear, try logging out and back in first, or join over the phone. Everyone is muted to ensure an excellent audio quality. You may submit questions by typing into the question pane, accessed via the toolbar. We will do our very best to weave in responses into the presentation as we go, but due to the very large number of attendees, we apologize in advance if we are unable to get to your question. We'll provide resource links at the end where you can get additional information. In addition, you will receive a post-conference email with a link to listen to the recording of today's presentation. And now I would like to introduce your host, Dave Rossi. Dave, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Stacy, and welcome everyone. Our discussion today is going to focus on how the industrial sector is actually preparing to come out of the world following the crisis that we're in. Right, the intersection between society and companies is more seamless than it ever has been. Our leaders are making decisions on a very public stage, and they're making them at a pace that we've not seen in the past. So we have a couple leaders today with us that we'll introduce in a second that are going to share some of their lessons learned and help all of us move forward. You'll hear some practical advice that'll help us set personal priorities for our businesses, and priorities for our team members. Before we dive in, though, we're going to do a quick round of introductions. As Stacy said, I'm Dave Rossi. I lead our advisory practice for the industrial group for KornFerry based in Chicago. I was telling the team as we were signing on earlier, we reopened our office yesterday, and myself and the three other people that are here are experiencing life in the new reality. Right? It's a little lonely here, but it is good to be back and have the option of coming in. I'm joined today by one of my fellow Chicago partners, Brad Burke.
So thanks, Dave. So I'm Brad Burke. I'm the Vice Chairman for the Global Supply Chain Officers practice here at KornFerry. In addition to my search work recruiting Chief Supply Chain and Chief Procurement Officers, I'm actually partnering with Dave to build the Supply Chain Advisory practice focused around improving individual and team performance across supply chain organizations while leveraging KornFerry's world-class assessment, development, and coaching assets. I actually have the privilege to introduce to you today Tom Linton. Tom is easily one of the most respected, innovative, and transformational chief supply chain and chief procurement officers in the world. He has broad multi-industry experience working with leading companies such as IBM, LG, and most recently Flex, where he partnered with industrial companies globally. What I would say is Tom is an award-winning thought leader. He's constantly published in the Harvard Business Review over the last decade. Tom, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Look forward to hearing your thoughts over the next hour. Dave, back over to you so you can introduce Vicki.
Thanks. And I've had the pleasure of knowing Vicki well for the last 3 years almost, since she rejoined the industrial sector as the Chief Human Resources Officer for WestRock. Most people on the call probably have WestRock product, something WestRock has bought into their home close by. They're one of the leading companies in consumer and industrial packaging with over 50,000 employees in 30 countries. Vicky returned to the industrial space after some time away with Microsoft and Coca-Cola. So she has some good context, both inside and outside of our verticals, after starting her career at Honeywell. So Tom, Vicky, thank you again for taking the time to join us today. And let's get right into the content, right? We don't really have, there's never enough time to talk about this. So we want to start off by exploring changes in leadership behavior that we're seeing through the crisis. And if we start reflecting on your recent experience, what are some of the things that you've seen that have created challenges personally as a leader or for those around you? And what behaviors have you had to change or lessons learned that you'd like to share? And Vicky, why don't we start with you on that question?
Sure. Thanks, Dave. I would say a couple things come to mind as I reflect on the question. First, there is, whether you say there's power of being in front or an advantage during times that we've just experienced, whether it's setting policy, new practices, figuring out a path forward where you've never been before, there is real advantage for the organization when you can get in front. I would say the second thing I've seen is just the importance. So I lead a function and the importance of being connected to the business. There are so many moving parts when you have a crisis and everything changes from one morning to the afternoon, one day to the next. So I would say just a real connection with the organization is paramount. And then kind of this notion of being nimble and responsive. Sometimes 70% is good enough. And when you're in a crisis, that may be all you're going to get, if that. And so being nimble and kind of thinking through the unanticipated, anticipate the unanticipated, I would say are some of the things that were important and still are, frankly, over the last 4 months. And then my last observation is calm with a direction. If leaders are maybe have their hair on fire, to coin a phrase, when it's a crisis, are starting to show the signs of the crisis affecting them, it's hard for the organization. They tend to feel that amplified. So I think one of the characteristics of leaders going through this is their ability to maintain calm and a sense of direction and get their voice out there on a regular basis.
Thanks, Vicky. Tom, I know you have some thoughts on this from our prep the other day. So if you wanted to share some of your interest and observations from the recent times.
Yeah. So, I come at my perspective from an operations supply chain perspective. And a lot of the issues that have emerged with the current crisis are around supply chains. In fact, notably, I think just about everybody's talking about it now in some form or fashion. And what I try to encourage people to do when it comes to supply chain management in general is to have a bias for action. It's very easy to kind of watch things and be a deer in the headlights, so to speak, when a crisis hits. But it's really important that flow constantly occur. Supply chains are material in motion. They're basically, which is cash in motion. So if you think about it from that perspective, if it's sitting still, it's called inventory, and inventory is not good. So flow is really important, and friction is bad. And there is a tendency in situations when a crisis hits for things to freeze, and you have to kind of break through that, and you actually move quickly. Some people like to use the word agility or pivoting, but the ability to actually keep movement going, in fact, accelerating in certain situations can give you competitive advantage. So flow is important. I think also from a behavior leadership standpoint, I think people who might be really good leaders in peacetime may not be good wartime leaders. There are certain characteristics. If you think about Churchill was just another prime minister, during World War II, and he rose to the occasion. So some people have that bias, have that ability to move and act, and it helps keep things that can happen wrong, like reliance issues, or where you have actually supply chains that can break down, operations that can fail. when you really have a wartime kind of mentality as you come through the crisis. And as you come out of it, to the extent that you've been successful in actually moving operations fluidly, and the flow is good, then what you're going to have is a better outcome. I think the number one thing is bias fraction, but there's a second thing which I kind of like to see, and that is a broader view of what's happening. There's an author who I've read extensively, several of his books. He's a Duke professor, Adrian Bajan, wrote a book called Designing Nature and another book called Physics of Life, where he actually talks about how things are designed has a lot to do with whether they're successful or not. If you think about how a river flows, right, it flows successfully when it's got the ability to navigate without obstacles. And a lot of times leaders, the best thing that that you can do is remove obstacles. Look for the rocks in the road, look for the obstacles, and figure out through design how to move around them rather than just by brute force. So those are two things that I usually see as being very beneficial as people try to move through a crisis and then move out of it.
Thank you for that. And one of the things, you both talked about the bias for action and making decisions with less information potentially in the past, but there's a complicating factor for people working remote, right? And not having that live interaction. What have you seen, either from a board perspective or an aligned perspective, of empowering folks and getting them to handle this, to generate an energy for action and an energy for change in these times? I'll open that up to both of you.
Go ahead, Vicki.
So, all right, so I'll jump in. I would say if I think about my own rhythms, I had to change some things in order to make sure the organization had energy, we had the right connections, we were staying well attuned to what was happening. So we immediately set up every day a touch point for 45 minutes. And then, of course, as time went on, we adjusted that to 3 times a week. But in the beginning, that regular touch point to get a pulse on what was happening, information people needed to make the right decisions, was paramount. And what it did is it actually brought the team together. And we began leading more as one. And then we expanded that to the entire function, and did that once a week. So as a leadership team, we had everyday calls once a week. We had the entire function together. And many of my peers emulated a similar model to get the information flowing in the organization so people felt they had what they needed to make the choices on the ground. And then we did some enabling things that were very helpful. So when there were decisions made by the leadership team of the company, we got those out very quickly, whether it was policy decisions, whatever that might be, a weekly touch point with all people managers of the company. So that communications rhythm had to look different than the past and more present, consistent, people could count on, and filled with the information they needed so they could make the choices they needed to make locally. We did something actually quite similar with our board of directors as well. We set up a regular weekly call with them where we would walk through people matters first, then business matters, customers, supply chain, and then ended with kind of the financials of the organization. And that kept our board very connected to what was going on in the organization. And many of them have advice from all different companies they've served on. And so we were able to tap into some of the experiences they had as well. So I think the rhythms of the communication were important. And then figuring out how to cascade needed information in the organization timely so people could make the choices they need to make with confidence.
Thanks, Vicki. Tom, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think speed is important. I was always a proponent of double the good, half the bad, triple the speed in normal times. But getting digital is a way to become faster. And just think about our world right now. If this crisis hit and we didn't have the digital tools that we're communicating on right now, and 120 years ago, at the turn of the century, we had horses and cars sharing the same road. But as World War II rose, all of a sudden, all the technology solutions like automobiles and other things became extremely important. And by the late teens, 1918, 1920, there are no more horses on the road. They were all cars. And so I think digital will be like that for us. I mean, we're in an era-defining moment. It's kind of like the analog world is being left behind and everything will be digital. So I don't care what function you have. You need a digital strategy. You need to have a digital solution. And not just for reasons like this, but for data management, visualization of data. In supply chain operations, if you don't visualize your data, you can't fix what you can't see today. So you got to have the data not just in your enterprise, but you got to have visualizations that allow you to act on it. Because if you're not digital and you're sitting at home, how can you act on information and the data without having it presented to you in such a way that you can do something about it? So I think most people, again, as we talked first, have a bias for action. Then they have visualized data that they can actually move on. Most people will make the right decisions and actually do things. It's just a question of, do they have the tools and the technologies to actually give them the information to make the decisions that they need to make. And a lot of people are stuck with some problems where maybe they cannot see that.
Great. Well, I appreciate it. It sounds like think, act, lead, communicate, right? All those things just came up in your answers. We would like that. Let's move on to our next topic. Brad, you want to tee up the next scenario? You're on mute, Brad.
Sorry about that, guys. So listen, knowing that both of you are definitely purpose-driven leaders, I'm really curious with this whole conversation this day about disruptive leaders and self-disruptive workforces and being more agile and flexible. I guess the question that I have is, how has anything changed in terms of how you look for leaders in an organization? And how do you go develop leaders that can live in the unknown world that we're really in today, and not only for today, but really looking out over the next 12 to 24, 36 months? Tom, let's start with you.
Yeah, I always come from the point of view, and it's a bit of a cliche, but managers manage down, leaders manage up. And that's because if you're not looking up and out, you can't really lead. So the characteristics I think that are extremely important now is a lot of employees want to know, well, what does the future look like for me personally? What does the future look like for my company? What does it look like for my industry? And I think it's important that we look for leaders who are optimistic. When you're in heat of battle and when you're in the middle of a crisis, I often go back and talk about, well, what was 2008 look like? What did 2001 look like? What did 1990 look like? And what did 1980 something look like? So you can, most people who are fairly new in a company, maybe they joined the company since 2009, or even more recently, which includes a lot of our younger people. They don't know that these things happen. You just don't know what that thing is going to be. And it's going to be a crisis du jour in my world. I always call it crisis du jour. And you don't know it until it happens. But if you have a mental mindset and you look for people who have a mindset of preparation, I heard it said that the most agile companies plan to be agile. There's a planning component to agility. It's just not like you're going to wake up one day and you're going to be agile. If you plan for it and you have resiliency as part of your mindset, almost a paranoia about it in terms of risk management, you're going to be fine. So you just have to assure people and leaders and look for people who have that capability to assure, lead, and actually see through the crisis to the other side, because there will be sun on the other side. It just, in 2008, we thought the sky was falling, right? And it wasn't until all of a sudden in June 2009 that we realized that things were rip roaring again, and those that hesitated missed out in a big turn in the economy, which occurred in 2009. So those are the things that I would encourage.
Terrific. Vicki, what do you think is going to be required of leaders in this new disruptive landscape we're living in today?
Yeah, I'm going to jump off of one of the thoughts Tom had, and I'm going to start with empathy. And I'll start there because whenever there's a crisis, there's also a high degree of stress. And that stress shows itself in your organization in a lot of different ways. And effective leaders, I think, are those I'm finding that have a good sense of empathy for what people are experiencing in the organization, and at the same time, a good clarity about what they need to do within the business and can chart that path. So that balance of both is important, I think. I think the other thing I look for is the ability to suspend what you know for sure and not be encumbered by it, and look for what you don't know and then figure out your plans. So I think Tom talked about leaders that get stuck a bit and times of crisis. I think where leaders were, I know this piece for certain, I don't know about what's happening now, therefore I don't know what to do. That's problematic in a crisis. So I think leaders who can effectively suspend what they know, reach out to what they don't know, and figure out that path forward and be nimble about it, I think are characteristics that are important going forward. And then I would say the last is the ability to collaborate, not only across your own system as an organization, but with your customers, with your suppliers. Reach out early, often, regularly, and navigate the way you need to move your business forward, your support of your customers forward together. It's the individuals who operated a bit like an island, or the leaders who were more hunkered down and island-like, I think struggled the most. So those would be the three things I would look for going forward.
Question for you, Vicki. How do you find the people that are deep inside of an organization that you actually hope have the ability to flex and be nimble enough and agile enough to get others around them to be inspired to do what they didn't think of possible, or they even were capable of doing?
Yeah. Yeah, Tom kind of hit on this as well earlier, but there are individuals in a crisis that suddenly rise to the top, and they're in every organization. They can be, for me, it's a mill or a converting facility, as well as in a regional or headquarters office. And they just rise to the top. They see it as a moment to rally the team, rally the organization, and they rise up. And they do it through their actions, they do it through their words, they do it through how they care for one another. And so I've seen it time and time again. I'm just a big believer that there are phenomenal leaders at all levels of the organization, and a crisis sometimes causes them to rise.
Terrific. Tom, question for you. Thanks, Vicki. As a leader of a supply chain organization, CPO organization that was truly all over the world, that flex, the inability to be able to walk the floors and really see real time what the data that you might be getting over your computer is telling you. How do you balance that in terms of moving forward and ensuring that your customers, you're doing what is right for your customers and you're delivering what your customers are expecting of you? If you can't walk the
This
floor.
is where what I touched on earlier, where you have pipelines of data that come to some form of virtual central depository that allow you to actually have the visibility to what's going on. I equate, the analogy I like to give is, if you don't have a way of dashboarding all your data digitally, it's like driving your car without a speedometer or without knowing how much fuel you have in your tank, and yet you're supposed to go faster in the dark. So it's actually in the first book I put out on this in 2016. I talked about it, the imperative of real-time information. And a lot of companies still have batch-based enterprise compute systems, which actually are telling them what happened yesterday, what happened this morning. So to be a visionary leader nowadays, if you don't know what's happening in real time and you don't have a view of the battlefield in real time, it's going to be extremely difficult for you to navigate into the turn, I think is the term that what you're using, the title of this thing. You need that in order to navigate through it. And with that information, you can actually do things remotely from wherever, because everybody's, we call it one version of the truth. Everybody can see the same thing wherever they are in the world. As long as you have the right protocols and rules, 30 days is bad, and therefore it's red. And then everybody sees it as red because it's aging to everybody the same way. With that kind of insight and information, you can begin to make good decisions quickly. The faster you make decisions, the more likely you are to rise above your competition if he's making decisions slower than you. And you can be more successful long term if you continue. Really, let's face it, leaders make decisions. That's what they do. So if the leaders are presented with the data to make better decisions on a regular basis, they're going to be more successful than those that don't do that.
So both of you have come from different industries, which is one of the key reasons I think Dave and I selected you for the panel, because you're bringing perspectives from the consumer industry, technology industries. Do you see, maybe I'll pose this to Vicky, do you see a huge difference, Vicky, in the ability to harvest people that can make decisions, maybe without all the facts and all the data, in a different industry than what you maybe see in an industrial industry right now?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was at Microsoft, we had the economic crisis of 2008. Now I'm at WestRock, and we have the pandemic and diversity crisis that has hit the world. And I'm in an industrial. And it's interesting because the same, in a way, some of the same underlying leadership attributes show themselves. You had leaders who were able to rise up during the economic crisis, and you had some that just weren't able to get out of what they knew for certain and lead in an unusual setting. I find the same here. So there's some attributes that hold themselves true, even though the businesses were different, the industries were different, and the crises were different. But they do hold themselves. Can you anticipate? I think that's the important part of how you develop your leaders. Are you putting them through scenarios that enable them to anticipate and build that skill set along their career trajectory, so that when that crisis hits, whether it's every 8 years, every 10 years, they've got a little bit of a foundation on which they can draw.
Terrific. Dave, I'm going to turn it over to you for our next scenario. Thank you both. Dave, you're on mute. You did the same thing. That's all right.
It's frozen. Can you hear me now? Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. My computer froze for a minute. Appreciate it, Brad. And thanks. I thought we could use more time today because the discussion is very interesting. But Tom and Vicky, what we're seeing is a unique time for our businesses to reconnect with customers, right? And this is providing us an opportunity both on the B2B side and with our end users to be in a more intimate way, whether it's helping them schedule, understand their supply chain flows, or other things. And we're interested into what you see as the biggest opportunity for businesses in our space and what impact it's having on your workforce that we can change, and really what risk is it introducing into our businesses. So Vicky, if we could start with you.
from where I sit, or the business that I'm in, what we have found is being there for your customer with what they were experiencing during the crisis is the best form of partnership. And so we made it a point to kind of reach out early, often, figure out what our customers need, let them know that we were available, try to understand the challenges that they were experiencing, whether it was on the supply chain side, and we were able to serve in that capacity. So I think whether, regardless of the type of crisis it might be, reaching out immediately is critical. And what that does is it carries you forward. So as the crisis begins to dissipate and you're into a new normal, that relationship, those bonds that you formed with your customers, make a huge impact on how you work together to solve each other's challenges going forward. So I think customer intimacy and figuring out creatively how you can help is one of the best things you can do now, and it'll serve you down the road. In terms of what it means for the employee base, reaching out looks different, right? It didn't mean getting on an airplane and going to visit the customer. It meant calling up, having a conversation, using the data in front of you, figuring out technology in a way that you could be as close to them as possible. So for all of our employees, it meant working very differently. Now that differently, I think, will have an effect on what business looks like in September, November, December. I think our patterns are going to look very different than they do today.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, two quick examples. I was talking to a Starbucks executive this morning, and we all know Starbucks, so it's a good analogy where they were, I mean, half their business was disrupted immediately and shifted to drive-through from in-store when all the stores had to close because of the COVID crisis. And their ability to shift their business model and be able to service that customer, so that I could still get my my Starbucks, through my drive-through instead of picking it up, I think is a perfect example of being able to pivot. Another is United by Blue, an apparel company in Philadelphia. My son is CEO of. I know he struggled with the fact that 60% of his revenue was coming from brick and mortar stores, but realized that all his customers needed masks. So he shifted all this production over to making masks, therefore recovering another 20% of his business that was lost. I think customers' need versus wants is really important, and I think if you can anticipate what a customer needs and actually do that for them, in the case of Starbucks, in the case we wanted our coffee, therefore we just had to move to a drive-through process, or an apparel company that had the supply chain to build clothing, but actually do that quickly to make masks. I think are two very quick pivots that can occur. Or in the case of a company like Flex, or an electronics company, making ventilators instead of parts for automobiles. I think the ability to do that and to do that successfully, and when we look at when the history is written about what happened during this process, I think there'll be a lot of companies like that were able to survive it. And as we all know, because we read bankruptcies every day, there'll be a lot of companies that didn't make the turn and will not survive it because they weren't able to quickly shift their business models to adapt to using their core strengths, in this case, like apparels for masks, or coffee from inside a pickup to a drive-through, anything like that, where you had to modify your business model in one direction or another. I think history will show that those companies survived, some even thrived as they come through this crisis.
Great, really appreciate it. And we've talked a lot about the crisis. We really haven't touched too much on the role D&I is playing on shaping the future. So I'm curious, in addition to the other pressures, but what are you seeing in the workforce right now, and how diversity and inclusion can help us see the turn and accelerate through it? So Tom, you're talking. Can we stick with you to start that one?
Yeah. So I was just having a conversation about Gen Z this morning, which is really those born after 1996. So we're talking basically the people that are exiting universities now, and or even earlier, and their thought process is basically lives in a digital world, and they are digital natives, and they think and act all along those ways. And I think we have to be in conversation with whether it be by gender, by race, by age, increase the amount of conversations we have with our workforce around how they feel about this, different ways that they think they can contribute to it. Because in a world where everybody's in isolation from one another, we've all had occasions, I'm sure, in the last several months where you had a video call or a phone call, which should have gone 30 minutes and it went an hour. We've all had those experiences, and I think it's taught us the power of communication, the power of words, and getting into deeper conversations with employees about how they feel about it. Are they okay? Is their family okay? And exactly, and this came out of the Gen Z discussion I had this morning, where don't talk about us, talk with us, a kind of a thing. And I think there was a tendency for a lot of when we talk about employees, for example, we think we know, but then we find out really we don't really know as much as we think. So I think the conversation is where I would start.
Great. Vicki, how about on your side?
Yeah, I'll jump off of the last comment Tom made. I think enabling the conversation and creating a platform for it so that you are talking together, learning together, was paramount in the last several weeks. And I think the other thing that is key in the area of diversity and inclusion is not to have it be a one-time discussion and a one-time event centered around the moments that happened. I think it's more about, as organizations, how do you continue to create the platform for that ongoing conversation, that ongoing understanding together and working through together, as the organizations that are going to win in this space and really leverage the power of the diversity in their own organization. I also think there's a social responsibility or community responsibility that companies have where they work and where their team members live that is also important. And I think companies need to work at figuring out how they can best communicate or contribute in their communities and have the presence of bridging and bringing together, and again taking it, leveraging the power of diversity in their own organization, in their relationship with their customers and their suppliers. So again, I think it's both internal, the right conversation and the right platforms ongoing, and then what contributions can companies make within their own communities where they work to really foster diversity and inclusion and create the bridges that enable organizations and communities to come together.
It's great. And there's such a great theme here about communication, together, decision making. And one of the things we're seeing is, companies across industries are making decisions today, whether they're tactical or strategic, that are going to shape how work gets done for years to come, right? And making sure that is an orchestrated effort and people are making them on the same criteria. A little bit what you were saying before, Tom. Know what your standards are and decide toward those standards. I want one other thing before we move off this topic, and Vicki, I know you deal with it quite a bit. Our workforces in the industrial companies, we have a good chunk of our workforce that is considered essential, right? They are making and moving product that has to get to market, more important than ever in a lot of situations. And then we have another segment of our workforce that we are saying stay away, right? Learn how to work remote and get into a new environment. How are you striking that balance? Of course, when I talk, the fire engine goes by. But how are you striking that balance to bring some people in, know that you're doing your best to care for their safety, while in another chunk of your workforce having to say, for your safety, please work remote?
Yeah, I think the first thing we had to do was help the organization understand context. And so we started with a bit of the why. Take a page out of Simon Sinek, right? why it was important that our manufacturing operations employees come into work to serve our customers, to do the things that we committed to do. And then how are we as an organization taking extra steps to create the safest environment possible for their coming into work? And then for those that were able to work from an alternative location, whether it be home or something else, again, the context for that enabled them to do that. And in fact, by having fewer people in our manufacturing operations, enabling some to work from home, we're actually creating safety for both. And so that context became critically important, because you don't want to divide in your organization. You want people to continue to work together, even though their circumstances are different. And so we focused on that, and it worked well for us. I would say now I've got almost the opposite question, right? Faced with how do you effectively bring people back to work in a very safe way, recognizing that you've got a varied workforce and they all get different satisfactions out of work. Some people are satisfied working from an alternative location. Other people are dying to get into a group setting. And how do you do that in a way that makes it safe and effective for both? So I'm now on the other side, wrestling with the next set of questions around what does the new workforce look like in both our manufacturing settings. How do we reroute work? How do we reroute things in the facilities? And then how does new work look like in a more office setting? And I honestly, Dave, I think we're at a pivot point. Tom used that word earlier, but I think companies around the globe are rethinking what does their manufacturing environment look like from a safety standpoint going forward, and what does their office structure look like? And then how do you create the culture that binds those organizations together so that you are working as effectively, efficiently as one company in a very different setting that I think is going to be our future. And I don't have the answers to it. It's something we're wrestling with.
Well, I do think you teed up the infinite game quite well, though, right? When you quoted Sinek.
Yeah.
How about you, Tom?
Well, was it just a few years ago, we were talking about 6 degrees of separation between every human on the planet, right? So now we're talking about 6 feet of separation. So, I think fortunately, as a global manufacturer, and when you look at global manufacturing, fortunately, this thing hasn't hit everybody at the same time in the same way. So, places like China have loosened up. There's certain countries that are doing better than others. So some manufacturing operations are capable to do more. They're more prepared now, right, than we were when this thing first came barreling down in February, March. We were all in the same level of preparedness, I would say, in terms of face masks and separations and, whether it be plexiglass shields between operators and manufacturing lines, all those things that now seem to be pretty much in place. So really the question is now, as this thing happens again, is how do you become productive? How do people become productive? How do they feel like they're contributing without, adding any safety risks to themselves? So, and how do companies protect people? I think is probably the most important thing. And I think customers demand it. I think suppliers demand it. I think we all worry, right, about how things are delivered to our homes. Whether or not, is it done correctly? I mean, I personally have applauded the UPS guy and the FedEx guy right now, thanking them for their support. I mean, because there are certain industries, and supply chain is one of them, where people were at more risk than in others. And so whether you're a company on the delivery side, whether in a distribution center, a warehouse, manufacturing, they're the ones that had to step up and do things better. And fortunately, because this thing is kind of rolling in waves throughout the world, at least you can shut down one operation to keep people safe, and another one maybe can open up to help support that. So supply chains have to shift the ability to shift to another location when one location goes down. I think is important. The dual sourcing or the duality of operations. adding some level of redundancy has been really important. Will go on to be more important. Everybody talks now about, you got to remember the conversation last July was about tariffs. The conversation last July was about, what does it mean with Brexit? All the things that we talked about last year are different than this year. And what I like to say to people is the conversation next year will be different than the conversation this year. So how do we make sure that we're adaptable enough to be ready for that next conversation, which will occur, and we don't know what it is yet, but there will be one.
Right, and I think like you said earlier, be ready, anticipate the unanticipated, right? Because something is going to happen that will throw us another curve and give us an opportunity to innovate, right? We're getting to the point of the discussion where it's time for the rapid fire questions. So I'll invite everyone to put questions in the chat window. And as those start to flow in, Vicki, I'll ask you first, and then Tom, what is one piece of advice that you'd like the 400 or so people that have listened to this today and those that'll sign in later to take away from the conversation as we look to accelerate through the turn?
One piece of advice. I'm going to take a little liberty, Dave, and I'm going to do two. First is don't hesitate to lean in and lead. It may be uncharted territory. It may be you've not experienced it before, but we all have an important role to play in leading our teams and leading our organizations. So whatever comes your way, don't hesitate to lean in and calmly lead. And the second would be, as leaders, take care of yourself. And yes, there's a very physical side to that during this pandemic, but in any challenge that comes your way, if you're taking care of yourself, you can best lead when you're with your team and with your organization and customers.
Two is worth it. Thank you.
I'll go with two as well. Number one, I'd say is don't drive distracted. If you're a leader, make sure you have your own thoughts in order. Don't be distracted by all the noise that's occurring in the world. You've got your own company, your own business, your own people. You have to make sure that you're not distracted. Second is I like to say lead, follow, or get out of the way. All three are good options. Lead. If you're a leader and you have a way to go about doing that successfully, but also following the leader is a very important thing to do, and great followers of leaders is how things get done. And sometimes, quite honestly, don't clutter up the situation. If get out of the way. If something's happening and there's action occurring, and you're being in the middle of it, is slowing it down, again, with speed being an imperative, step out of the way and work on something else, and let those folks who are online to follow and lead. I think that would be my 3 points there.
Appreciate it. It reminds me of an old Army thing of, if it moves, salute it. If it doesn't move, paint it, right? But do something, right?
Do something, right?
Yeah. So, Vicki, a quick question for you. You mentioned the importance of nimble learning, right? How are you supporting WestRock's employees today, especially your leaders, on building up that competency across the organization?
Well, at the very moment, Dave, it's happening through experience. What we do every single day, we are nimble learners, or forcing ourselves to be. But it's interesting. I got a phone call earlier this morning where we are completely re-engineering how we think about executive leadership, management development in the company, and how we think about things quickly and using very different technology so that we can create kind of an ongoing, remote but meaningful learning environment. So right now, I would say it's by the experience and continuous discussion and dialogue. And in the future, I think it'll have a little bit more technology and structure attached to it. But being able to do things immediate or quickly is going to be important in the learning in the org.
Tom, are you seeing anything different on how people learn right now and the pace at which they want to learn?
Well, the thing I like to refer to is, culture and change are like the wind, right? You sit there and you think you're going to stop it or change it, and you're not going to. So the better approach is to go with the flow, as I even opened with. I mean, if you're looking for work, figure out where the work is. There is work. Do that, and do something that allows to facilitate movement. Again, everything I think about and do is going to facilitate movement. But even if it's yourself personally, if you find yourself not something's not working, change it, do something different. If you find that your people aren't happy, change it, do something different. If things are not successful or safe, change it and do something different. I think the ability to just have that mindset, empathy is a great one too, where you can actually enter into the mindset of people. I mean, we all have similar concerns and thoughts at the moment. I mean, I think an amazing thing about this crisis is that it kind of hit the world equally. It kind of solved the crisis to the lowest common denominator. We know that getting sick or even dying from it is a reality. So I think that concept of just paying attention to where the opportunities are and seeking those out, and recognizing the fact that you're not going to change it, but you can actually go with it, I think, in that sense.
Appreciate it. Go ahead,
So
Brad.
Dave, I have a quick question for Tom. So Tom, you're on the board of Sierra Wireless. As you sit here and think about giving advice to CEOs in terms of how they manage to plan going forward with so much uncertainty as to which part of the markets, which industries are going to be changing, coming back sooner rather than later, what advice would you be giving a CEO right now in terms of how to think about their global supply chain to support their customers?
Well, technology, and it's a technology company, right? So technology is a one-way street. I don't think anybody in the world right now says, I need less technology. There are some, but most people recognize that technology is, whether it's 3G, 4G, 5G, and beyond, I mean, it's all getting better. This past week I had to upgrade my technology in my house because my router and my Wi-Fi was, a couple of years old, and as soon as I did, it got a lot better. So I think technology is one of those things, whether we're talking about personal devices or in our companies, making sure that we're moving with technology is going to be absolutely number one. So to your point, I think have faith in your business model. I don't care what company you're in, believe in it, and have endless optimism and drive in it. So for example, if you're a technology company, yeah, I think you can bet technology is probably going to improve. Technology is going to get better, and you want to be a part of that. And I think if you're in healthcare business, same thing with healthcare, medicines, pharmaceuticals. If you're in heavy industry, same thing is true there. I mean, it's very likely that every piece of industrial equipment is going to be connected to the Internet of Things, right? So believe in it. Don't not invest in it. Don't not believe in it. So, and I think it's you blow up the bridge behind you when you when you go forward. You can't think that, well, maybe maybe I'm going too fast or I'm going too slow. This we all got bumped around by this crisis. But the lesson of 2008-9 taught me, I don't know if anybody remembers, but in December 2008, nobody knew what 2009 demand looked like. It was like a dark picture. Yet by June of 2009, it was a V-shaped recovery, and things were coming back fierce. And those who didn't plan on the inventories or the lead times associated with that really got left behind. For those who were leaning into the future, not really lean into it. Don't be passive about it. And that confidence, I think, will also resonate with employees, resonate with customers, resonate with suppliers. I think it's all to the betterment of the culture that you create.
Terrific. Thanks, Tom.
I cannot thank the two of you enough, Tom and Vicky, for joining us today, right? And this is the part of the program where I'm supposed to give the one key thing, right? And the takeaway, and there's countless. But really, and as I'm reflecting on what you said today, we can't freeze in this as leaders, but we also have to be calm, and we have to recognize that the decisions we make are going to have lasting impact. So to do them thoughtfully, but not get frozen while we're making them. So with that, I want to thank you for planning some good ideas with us. And Stacy, turn it over to you to give us the way people can access information moving forward.
Thanks, Dave, and thank you, Vicky and Tom, and everyone for attending today's webinar. Session and other trends within the industrial sector to send to participants on the line shortly after today's event. Visit our Rapid Recovery Hub on KornFerry.com to learn more about how you and your business can prepare for a future beyond the crisis. On behalf of KornFerry and our presenters today, thank you for joining us and be well.
Not sure if I'm supposed to say anything right now, but Tom and Vicky, thank you both again. Truly a pleasure. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Tom, Stacy, Alexa. Really appreciate your support today.
Yeah, you guys all continue to stay safe and healthy, and hopefully we'll be able to meet again someday somewhere. Vicky, I'm not too far away when I'm in south of Atlanta, so maybe we'll catch up at some point.
I would like that. Thank you, Tom.
Enjoy the lake and enjoy the cave.